The world was a canvas of white and steel grey, stretching endlessly under a sky that felt less like a ceiling and more like a lid clamped down on the planet. Breath, snatched from lungs, didn't just mist. It crystallized instantly, tiny shards of ice scattering into the frigid air, a stark visual testament to the brutal cold. At Spirit's Watch, Anya Petrova's remote homestead, the mercury in the battered old thermometer had plunged to an unthinkable 74 nugs, a bone-chilling 95. 8°. This wasn't just cold, it was a record-shattering, soul-crushing deep freeze, a harbinger of a winter so profoundly savage it threatened to redefine survival itself. It was late January, the heart of the season, and the unforgiving landscape of the Sakha Republic had never felt more alien, even to those born of its icy embrace. Inside the small, meticulously maintained log cabin, Anya Petrova, a woman whose 90 years were etched onto her face like a topographical map of resilience, moved with a quiet, practiced grace. Every line, every crease told a story of blizzards weathered, famines endured, and a life lived in harmony with a land that demanded respect, often paid in hardship. Her movements were slow, yes, the inevitable consequence of age, but they were deliberate, imbued with a purpose and efficiency honed over nearly a century of waking before the sun. She stoked the wood-burning stove, the only true warmth in a world turned to solid ice, and the faint crackle and pop were a comforting counterpoint to the howling wind outside, a sound that seemed to carry the very despair of the frozen earth. Her morning rituals were as old as the mountains that loomed ghostly and white on the horizon. A cup of strong black tea, brewed with snowmelt, warmed her gnarled hands as she gazed out a window pane thick with frost. A tiny clear spot melted by her breath, revealing a world utterly transformed. Beyond the window, a low, mournful rumble reached her, a sound as familiar as her own heartbeat. It was the call of her Yakutian bisons, a magnificent herd, their shaggy coats thick with ice, their breath pluming like smoke signals from their sheltered enclosure. These were not just livestock, they were her family's legacy, living embodiments of her people's spirit, perfectly adapted to this harsh environment. Their very existence, a defiance of the elements. Anya felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to each beast, their survival inextricably linked to her own. They were her purpose, her unwavering anchor in a world that constantly shifted. Yet, despite the practiced comfort of her routine, an insistent tremor of unease rippled beneath Anya's calm exterior. It was a subtle discord, like a false note in a familiar melody. Her senses, sharpened by a lifetime of observation, picked up on something amiss. After her tea, she bundled herself in layers of fur and wool, a formidable silhouette against the blinding snow, and ventured out. The air seized her lungs, burning with each intake, but Anya paid it no mind. Her boots crunched through the fresh powder, each step a testament to enduring strength. As she approached the bison enclosure, her sharp, experienced eyes scanned the pristine white blanket. Then she saw them, not just one, but a bewildering array of tracks, fresh, deep, unmistakable. They were unusually large, certainly not from the smaller, more common fox or wolverine, and their sheer number was alarming, far too many for a lone wolf, or even a small pack. Her gaze, keen and unblinking, followed the winding trail in the snow, a chilling narrative laid bare. The tracks led directly from the distant snow-shrouded foothills, culminating in an unnerving cluster just meters from the sturdy timber walls of the bison pen. A jolt, cold and sharp as the Siberian wind, shot through her. Anya knew. She knew with the certainty of ancient wisdom passed down through generations. These were the paw prints of snow leopards, but not just a few. The sheer density and breadth of the tracks suggested an unprecedented gathering, a desperate convergence of predators driven by the unparalleled cold, and an instinct for survival as fierce as her own. Never in her 90 years, nor in the stories passed down from her grandmother, had she heard of such a thing. Snow leopards, typically solitary, secretive hunters of the high mountains, were encroaching upon the lower valleys, pushed to their absolute limits by the 95. 8° for temperatures that had frozen their usual hunting grounds, solid, and scattered their prey. The threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was immediate, overwhelming, a formidable army of hunger at her very doorstep. Anya stood motionless, the biting wind whipping strands of white hair from beneath her hood, her gaze fixed on the chilling evidence. Her peaceful existence, her life's work, the legacy of her family embodied by the magnificent bisons, was under siege. Nature itself, pushed to its breaking point by an extreme winter, had become an adversary, transforming ancient predators into an unprecedented force of destruction. How could an elderly woman, alone in this frozen wilderness, possibly contend with such a formidable and growing danger? The raw struggle for survival had just begun, and the odds against her and her precious herd seemed impossible. The biting wind howled its mournful song across the frozen expanse of Spirit's Watch, a symphony of nature's indifference that was now punctuated by something far more sinister. Anya Petrova, her 90 years etched into every line of her weathered face, had barely finished her morning rounds, checking the integrity of the bison enclosure, when the tracks she'd initially dismissed as lingering shadows transformed into undeniable proof. Fresh, deep paw prints, larger than any she'd seen in decades, marred the pristine snow, leading directly to the weakest point of the fence line. Her heart, a sturdy drum that had beaten rhythmically through nearly a century of harsh winters, hammered against her ribs with a new, urgent tempo. Before she could even process the full implication, a low growl, raw and guttural, sliced through the frigid air, confirming her gravest fears. A small, desperate pack of snow leopards, perhaps 3 or 4 gaunt figures, materialized from the swirling snow, their spotted coats blending almost perfectly with the blizzard's white canvas. Their eyes, glowing with a predatory hunger born of extreme cold and starvation, fixed on the hulking forms of the Yakutian bisons huddled within the enclosure. They were bold, driven by an instinct far stronger than caution, and they lunged, their sinewy bodies a blur of motion against the snow. Anya, despite the stiffness in her joints and the slow ache in her bones, moved with a speed that belied her age. There was no time for hesitation, no room for fear, only the ancient, ingrained response of a protector. She grabbed a nearby dry branch, its twisted form seasoned by years of wind and ice, and plunged it into the embers of a small, carefully maintained fire pit near her cabin. The wood caught quickly, flaring into a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Wielding the makeshift torch, she ran towards the fence, her movements slower than in her youth, each step a deliberate act of will. With her free hand, she struck a hollowed-out log, a traditional sucker warning drum, creating a deep, resonant thud that echoed across the valley. Simultaneously, a guttural chant, a series of ancient sounds passed down through generations of her ancestors, tore from her throat. It wasn't a melody, but a primal cry, a challenge steeped in the wisdom of the land itself. The combination of crackling fire, percussive blasts, and her raw, unearthly voice momentarily startled the lead leopard. It hesitated, its ears flattening against its skull, a flicker of confusion in its usually unwavering gaze. The confrontation was harrowing, a close-quarters dance between raw instinct and ancestral knowledge. The leopards, though momentarily deterred, were relentless. One, bolder than the rest, attempted to scale the fence, its claws scrabbling desperately against the frozen wood. Anya swung the flaming branch, not aiming to harm, but to create a barrier of heat and light, the intense heat even at 95. 8° surprised the creature, forcing it to recoil with a frustrated snarl. Her breath plumed in the brutal cold, her muscles screaming in protest, but her spirit remained unyielding. The sheer effort of wielding the heavy branch and maintaining the chant tested her physical limits, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. Each swing was a testament to her incredible courage, but also to the toll age had begun to exact. Finally, with a collective snarl of frustration and a reluctant glance at their unyielding adversary, the desperate pack retreated, melting back into the swirling snow, leaving only their tracks and the lingering scent of wildness in their wake. Anya stood there, gasping for breath, the torch flickering in her trembling hand, the silence that followed more profound than the earlier chaos. It wasn't long after the last echo of the leopard's retreat faded that the roar of an engine broke the stillness. Yuri Volkov, Anya's grandson, his face a mask of worry, pulled his battered pickup truck to a skidding halt outside the homestead. He had braved the treacherous, ice-slicked roads from Kolodnaya, a drive that normally took hours, now feeling like an eternity. Seeing the fresh tracks, the disturbed snow, and his grandmother still holding the smouldering branch, he leaped out, his usual calm replaced by a surge of panic. "Grandma, are you all right? What happened?" he exclaimed, rushing towards her, his eyes scanning for any sign of injury. He was horrified by the close call, the raw evidence of the struggle painted vividly across the snow. The notion of her facing such a threat alone, at her age, gnawed at him. "This is it, Grandma," he pleaded, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and exasperation. "You have to come back to town with me. Spirits watch it isn't safe anymore. Look at this, a whole pack. It's too much. The herd is too large, the conditions are too extreme, and this threat, it's just too great for you to manage alone." He gestured wildly at the vast expanse of the enclosure, then at the biting cold that seemed to cut to the bone. "What if I hadn't come? What if next time they don't back down? You could have been seriously hurt or worse." Yuri's frustration was palpable, a tangible weight in the frigid air. His concern for Anya Petrova was genuine, a deep-seated love that warred with his modern sensibilities. He saw her traditional ways as outdated, dangerous, a stubborn refusal to adapt that put her life at risk. "Think about it, Grandma. We have proper doctors in Kolodnaya, a warm house, people to look after you. This isn't the old days. You can't fight off 1,000 snow leopards by yourself. It's like trying to stop an avalanche with a snow shovel." He tried to mask the edge of desperation in his voice, but it was clear. His plea was not just about safety, but about a hidden personal crisis that made his need for her to be safe even more acute. Anya listened, her gaze fixed on the retreating tracks, her internal conflict playing out across her features. Her unwavering will, a legacy of generations, clashed with the undeniable reality of her deteriorating physical strength. Every fiber of her being resisted the thought of abandoning her ancestral home and her beloved bison, yet she couldn't ignore the truth in his words, the genuine fear in his eyes. As the immediate danger subsided and the adrenaline began to wane, a new, unexpected presence emerged from the edge of the forest. A lone wolf, its coat matted and its gait favoring one leg, limped cautiously towards the homestead. The sight of the gaunt, limping predator confirmed Anya Petrova's deepest fears. The harsh winter was driving every creature to desperate measures. She didn't waste a moment. The biting wind, a relentless tormentor at nearly -96 degrees Fahrenheit, spurred her into immediate action. Her 90-year-old bones might creak, but her resolve was as solid as the ancient permafrost beneath her feet. The first order of business was reinforcing the perimeter of Spirit's Watch, the ancestral homestead. With a pickaxe she'd used for decades, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands, Anya began chipping away at the thick ice clinging to the riverbanks. She then meticulously packed chunks of this hardened ice and dense frozen snow against the existing wooden fences, creating a formidable, slick barrier that would be difficult for any predator, no matter how agile, to scale. Each swing of the pickaxe was deliberate, each placement of ice a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge. Next, Anya turned her attention to setting up an early warning system. From a weathered leather pouch, she carefully extracted an assortment of dried animal bladders and small resonant copper bells. These she strung together with sinew, attaching them at strategic points along the newly fortified fences and in the sparse, wind-sculpted trees surrounding the bison enclosure. The slightest tremor, the brush of a paw against a wire, or even a strong gust of wind would send a cacophony of jingles and rustles echoing through the frigid air, alerting her to any unwelcome visitors. It was old-school technology, perfected over countless harsh winters, but in this remote corner of what felt like the last frontier, it was more reliable than any modern gadget. Elena Volkov, Anya's great-granddaughter, initially watched her great-grandmother's tireless efforts with a teenager's typical blend of boredom and mild disdain. She'd been dragged out to this desolate place from Kolodnaya, a town that, while isolated, at least had cell service and a struggling internet connection. Her phone, a lifeline to her friends and the digital world, was practically useless out here. Elena shivered, pulling her heavy parka tighter, wishing she were back home, maybe scrolling through TikTok or catching up on the latest Netflix series. She saw Anya's work as quaint, perhaps even a bit pathetic, a 90-year-old woman battling nature with ice and bells, like something out of a documentary about a bygone era. Yet, as the days bled into one another, Elena found herself drawn, almost against her will, to the methodical rhythm of Anya's movements. There was a quiet intensity, a deep purpose in every task. Anya didn't rush, didn't complain, didn't even seem to notice the soul-crushing cold that made Elena's fingers ache even through her thick mittens. Anya was preparing special herbal deterrents too, crushing dried local plants with a mortar and pestle, mixing them with rendered animal fat. The pungent, earthy aroma, a strange blend of unfamiliar herbs and something almost medicinal, filled the small, warm cabin. Anya would then smear this potent paste onto the lower parts of the fence posts, a scent barrier designed to repel the keen-nosed snow leopards without harming them. It was a strategy of deterrence, not destruction. Anya, with the uncanny perception of an elder who had seen countless generations come and go, sensed Elena's budding curiosity. She didn't push, didn't demand attention, but subtly began to weave stories into her work. "You see this plant, little star," Anya would say, holding up a gnarled root. "My grandmother taught me how to find it even under the deepest snow. It keeps the sickness from the herd, and its scent, well, it tells the big cats to keep their distance." She'd recount tales of past blizzards that had swallowed entire villages, of winters so severe that even the bears wouldn't stir from their dens. She spoke of the resilience of their people, the Saka, who had learned to live in harmony with this formidable land, not against it. She shared stories of her own youth, of chasing wild reindeer and learning the language of the winds. Elena, initially just listening out of politeness, found herself captivated. Anya's stories weren't just history, they were living narratives, filled with vivid details of survival, courage, and a profound respect for the natural world. She learned about the individual personalities of the bison herd, each one named, each one a thread in the family's legacy. She began to see the land not as an empty, hostile expanse, but as a vibrant, interconnected tapestry, full of hidden meanings and ancient wisdom. The cold still bit, but the stories warmed something deep inside her, forging the first fragile links of an emotional connection between the generations. Meanwhile, back in Kolodnaya, or perhaps after a brief fruitless visit to Spirit's Watch, Yuri Volkov was reaching his breaking point. His grandmother's stubborn refusal to leave was driving him nuts. He loved Anya, But he saw her actions as reckless, an old woman clinging to outdated beliefs in the face of an impossible situation. He worked a modern job, probably something tech-related or administrative, in Kolodnaya, and the thought of Anya facing down 1,000 snow leopards, a number that had surely grown in his mind, fueled by anxiety, alone, in that brutal cold, gnawed at him. He knew she wouldn't listen to him, not when her mind was set. He needed an authority figure, someone who could cut through the old-world traditions with official regulations and common sense. With a heavy sigh, Yuri picked up his satellite phone, its battery struggling in the cold, and dialed Konstantin Ivanov. Konstantin was the local wildlife official, a pragmatic, by-the-book kind of guy, in his mid-40s, known for his no-nonsense approach. Yuri explained the situation, exaggerating the numbers slightly, painting a picture of an out-of-control wildlife crisis and an elder in grave danger. He hoped Konstantin would intervene, maybe even force Anya to relocate for her own safety. It felt like a betrayal, but he told himself it was for her own good. A few days later, a beat-up, snow-caked pickup truck, emblazoned with the state's Department of Wildlife Management logo, rumbled its way towards Spirit's Watch. Konstantin Ivanov emerged, a man whose face was etched with the weariness of too many harsh winters and too many difficult decisions. He wore a standard-issue parka and carried a clipboard, his demeanor all business. He greeted Anya with a polite but firm nod, his gaze sweeping over the homestead, assessing the situation with a professional eye. Konstantin's professional gaze, though initially reserved, quickly registered the relentless toll etched into the very fabric of Spirit's Watch. The perimeter fences, once sturdy and unyielding, now bore fresh scars, gouges in the aged wood, snapped strands of wire, and deep claw marks in the frozen earth that spoke of desperate nightly assaults. The snow leopards, emboldened by a hunger that gnawed deeper than the Arctic cold, had abandoned their cautious reconnaissance, transforming into cunning besiegers. They no longer merely tested defenses, they orchestrated their attacks with a chilling, almost strategic precision, probing weak points, creating diversions, and striking with a ferocity that left Anya little time for rest. Each morning brought new evidence of their audacity, paw prints circling closer to the main cabin, faint bloodstains in the snow from a near miss with a stray bison calf, and the eerie silence that followed the frenzied chaos of the night. The constant vigilance exacted a brutal price from Anya. Her 90-year-old body, usually a testament to a lifetime of hardy resilience, began to betray her. Her movements, once fluid and purposeful, became stiff and labored, each step an effort against the crushing weight of exhaustion. Deep, bruised circles shadowed her eyes, mirroring the endless dark nights she spent huddled by the fire, listening for the telltale snarls and the frantic bellows of her herd. One frigid dawn, while repairing a section of fence near the Whispering Ice River, a sudden, unseen movement in the snow-laden brush startled her. She stumbled, her weight shifting awkwardly, and a searing pain shot through her left ankle as it twisted beneath her. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out, but the incident left her with a persistent limp, a constant reminder of her physical vulnerability. A deep gash across her forearm, acquired during a desperate scramble to chase off a particularly bold leopard from a stray calf, throbbed beneath layers of homespun cloth, a vivid, painful testament to her unwavering but increasingly costly resolve. Yuri, witnessing his grandmother's visible decline, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He saw the new limp, the deeper lines of fatigue etched around her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she poured their morning tea. He couldn't ignore the way she winced when she stood, or the slow, deliberate pace she now adopted for even simple tasks. His heart ached with a frustration born of profound love and fear. He pleaded with her, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Grandma, please, you have to leave. Look at you. This isn't worth it. Those bisons, they're just animals. Your life, your health, That's what truly matters. We can figure out something else for them, a sanctuary, a ranch, anything, but not at the cost of your life. He spoke with the earnest conviction of a man who believed in modern solutions, in the safety nets of civilization. He imagined her in a warm apartment in Kolodnaya, perhaps watching a rerun of an old sitcom, safe and sound, far from the biting cold and the predatory eyes in the dark. He even thought about calling up some contacts he had in the state capital, maybe even reaching out to some agricultural programs he'd seen advertised on TV, anything to get her out of this impossible situation. But Anya, despite the throbbing pain in her ankle and the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin, remained unyielding. Her gaze, though weary, held an unwavering fire. "Just animals, Yuri," she retorted, her voice raspy but firm. "They are more than that. They are the breath of our ancestors, the spirit of this land. They carry the stories of 1,000 winters, the strength that runs in our blood. To abandon them would be to abandon ourselves, to sever the last threads connecting us to who we truly are. This isn't just about bison, my grandson. This is about legacy, about the very soul of our people. It's about refusing to let the wild erase us, just as we refuse to let the modern world forget us. What would Thanksgiving be without family gathered? What would July 4th be without our history? These bisons are my history, my family, my everything." The weight of her words settled heavily in the frigid air, a stark contrast to Yuri's pragmatic appeals. Konstantin Ivanov, a man who prided himself on his objective assessment and adherence to protocols, found himself increasingly disturbed by what he observed. He had seen his share of wildlife conflicts, had dealt with everything from rogue bears in national parks to coyotes encroaching on suburban neighborhoods back in the lower 48, but the sheer number of snow leopards, their coordinated tactics, and their relentless pressure on Anya's herd were unlike anything he had ever encountered in his career, even in the most remote Alaskan wilderness. He spent hours tracing their intricate patterns in the snow, analyzing their attack vectors, and studying the intelligence behind their increasingly bold maneuvers. "This isn't just a few hungry cats, Anya," he admitted, his voice grave, the usual bureaucratic detachedness replaced by genuine concern. "This is an unprecedented surge, a crisis. The data, the tracks, the sheer persistence. It suggests an ecological imbalance we haven't seen before. This goes beyond local wildlife management. I believe the state government, perhaps even federal agencies, might need to intervene on a larger scale." Anya's heart sank at his words, a cold dread colder than the 95. 8 degrees air settling deep within her. She knew what larger-scale intervention often meant. It meant outsiders, people from far-off cities like Juneau or even Washington, D.C., imposing their will, their solutions, on her ancestral lands. It meant men with high-powered rifles and tranquilizer darts, helicopters buzzing overhead, and the brutal, indiscriminate culling of animals. It meant her bisons, her beloved herd, reduced to statistics, their lives ended not by the natural order of the wild, but by human decree. It meant the further disruption of a delicate ecosystem already teetering on the brink. And perhaps most painfully, it meant the final stripping away of her autonomy, her right to protect her heritage in her own way. The thought felt like a betrayal, a final injustice in a life already marked by relentless struggle. The overwhelming, multifaceted threat now loomed larger than ever, encompassing not only the relentless wild, but also the cold, impersonal hand of government intervention, threatening to erase everything she had fought so fiercely to preserve. The formidable weight of the world, encompassing both the relentless wild and the cold, impersonal hand of government intervention, pressed down on Anya, threatening to erase everything she had fought so fiercely to preserve. Yet, beneath the crushing burden, a different kind of pressure had begun to build, emanating from within her own mind. For several nights now, a recurring dream had haunted her sleep, a vivid tapestry woven from ancient fears and forgotten whispers. She saw a vast, endless white, a blizzard so thick it swallowed the sky, and then emerging from the swirling snow, not the familiar heavy form of a bison, but a fleeting, spectral figure, white as the driven snow, its eyes like chips of ancient ice. These white shadows moved with an eerie silence, circling her herd, their presence a silent, chilling promise of hunger. Each morning, Anya woke with a profound sense of foreboding, a gnawing certainty that the answer to her current plight lay not in the modern world's solutions, but in the echoes of her ancestors. One frigid morning, after the dream had left an especially deep imprint, a conviction settled over Anya with the clarity of a winter sky. She knew what she had to do. With a resolve that belied her 90 years, she bundled herself in layers of caribou hide and wool, the familiar scent of wood smoke clinging to her clothes, and made her way to a small hidden alcove in the main cabin. It wasn't a secret known to many, certainly not to Yuri, who would have dismissed it as outdated superstition. Behind a loose stone in the hearth, a place where generations of her family had kept their most precious and private treasures, she reached in, her fingers, gnarled with age but still nimble, tracing the rough, cold surface of the stone until they found what they sought. She pulled out a small, rectangular object, wrapped carefully in a piece of dried reindeer sinew. Unwrapping it, her eyes, though clouded by age, lit with recognition. It was a journal, not like the mass-produced paper-thin notebooks of today, but a relic of a bygone era. Its cover was crafted from the cured leather of a young moose, softened over centuries by the touch of countless hands, and its edges were worn smooth. Intricate saka symbols, etched with a precision that spoke of immense patience and skill, adorned its surface, telling a story even before the pages were opened. The binding, though old, was still strong, holding together brittle pages made from what felt like thin, dried birch bark, painstakingly prepared and preserved. Anya carried the journal to her favorite spot by the crackling fire, the warmth a comforting embrace against the biting cold seeping through the cabin walls. She carefully unwound the sinew, her movements slow and deliberate, as if handling something infinitely fragile. The journal fell open to a page marked by a dried sprig of juniper, its scent faintly herbal. Her gaze fell upon the elegant, flowing script, a language she had learned from her own grandmother, a language that spoke of the land and its spirits. The words on the page confirmed her deepest fears and rekindled a long-dormant hope. It was a detailed account, written by her great-great-grandmother, of a period known simply as the Great Hunger, a time from centuries past when the world had turned against them. The journal described a winter far more brutal than any living memory, when the ice held the land in an unyielding grip, and game grew scarce. During this cataclysmic period, the white shadows, as the journal called the snow leopards, had descended from the high mountains in unprecedented numbers, driven by their own desperation. They were not merely predators, but a force of nature, a spectral army of hunger. The descriptions were chilling, painting a picture of relentless pursuit, of families huddled against the cold, of the constant threat to their precious herds, the very lifeblood of their existence. But the journal was not merely a chronicle of despair. Interspersed among the harrowing accounts were passages of profound wisdom, not just prophecies of cyclical hardship, but specific forgotten strategies. These were not about outright battle, but about coexistence, about understanding the rhythm of the land and the needs of the predators. It spoke of ancient migration routes, of guiding the bison to specific sheltered grazing grounds during such times, places known only to the elders, where the snow was less deep or the winds less fierce. It detailed methods of creating natural deterrents, of reading the signs of the land to predict the movements of the white shadows, and even of offerings to the spirits of the wild to ensure balance. This wasn't just a historical record, it was a survival guide, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of her ancestors. Anya felt a surge of energy, a profound rejuvenation that coursed through her veins like a jolt of strong coffee. The physical limitations of her age, the weariness that often settled deep in her bones, seemed to recede. This wasn't just a book. It was a direct communication from her lineage, a guiding hand reaching across the centuries. It gave her renewed purpose, not just to survive, but to honor the wisdom of those who came before her. The journal was a beacon, illuminating a path forward that she had almost forgotten existed, a path rooted in ancestral guidance. Later that day, as the short winter afternoon began to fade into twilight, Anya found Eleanor by the window, sketching in her notebook, her headphones momentarily off. The teenager, usually absorbed in her own world of modern music and digital screens, looked up as Anya approached, the ancient leather-bound journal held carefully in her hands. "Elena," Anya began, her voice softer than usual. "Come, sit by the fire. I have something to show you, something from long ago." Elena, sensing the unusual solemnity in her great-grandmother's tone, put down her pencil and unplugged her earbuds. Her curiosity piqued. Anya began to read, translating the ancient Saka into Russian, then simplifying it further for Elena, who had grown up speaking primarily Russian and learning English in school, her Saka rusty. She spoke of the Great Hunger, of the white shadows that swept through the land, and of the strategies her ancestors employed. Elena listened, at first with polite interest, then with growing fascination. The tales were unlike anything she'd ever heard in history class or seen in a Hollywood blockbuster. The stories etched within the ancient journal were a stark contrast to the polished narratives Elena encountered in her history books, or the slick action unfolding on any streaming service. They spoke of a raw, unvarnished struggle for survival, of a deep, almost primal connection to the land that transcended mere ownership. Anya, her eyes alight with a renewed fire that belied her 90 years, recognized in those faded inkstrokes not just history, but a blueprint. The time for contemplation was over. The time for action, guided by the wisdom of her ancestors, had arrived. She decided to implement one of the journal's most daring strategies, relocating a significant portion of the Yakutian bisons to a more sheltered ancient grazing ground nestled deeper within ancestral Echoes Valley. This particular area, according to the ancestral writings, was known for its natural windbreaks and surprisingly resilient flora, even in the harshest winters, a sanctuary from the biting blizzards and, hopefully, the relentless snow leopards. The very idea was audacious, a gamble against nature's most formidable forces. The path to this secluded haven was legendary for its difficulty, even in milder conditions. Now, with the mercury stubbornly stuck around 96 degrees, it was nothing short of a perilous undertaking. Massive snowdrifts, sculpted by weeks of ceaseless wind, towered like frozen giants, blocking what little semblance of a trail existed. Beneath the pristine, deceptive surface lay hidden ice formations, slick and treacherous, capable of sending a bison or a human tumbling into a crevasse. Every breath was a painful inhalation of supercooled air burning the lungs. The extreme cold wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an agonizing, ever-present threat. Anya's sturdy, traditional fur-lined boots crunched through the snow, each step a deliberate, energy-sapping effort. Her breath plumed out in thick white clouds, instantly freezing to the fur around her face. Equipment, from the few modern tools she possessed to the very ropes used to guide the herd, became brittle and unyielding, threatening to snap under the stress. Fingers, even encased in thick mittens, ached with a deep, bone-chilling cold, the constant threat of frostbite a grim companion. Yuri Volkov, ever the pragmatist, was vehemently opposed. He followed Anya, his face etched with a familiar mixture of frustration and fear, his own breath catching in his throat with the effort. "Grandma, this is insane. Those old stories are just that, stories. They don't account for conditions like these, or 1,000 hungry snow leopards," he shouted, his voice muffled by the wind and the sheer scale of the landscape. He gestured wildly at the towering snowdrifts. "You're going to get yourself killed, and the herd along with you. Let's just go to Kolodnaya. We can figure something out there, something safe, something real. This wilderness is a death trap." His pleas, though heartfelt, felt to Anya like the whisper of a distant alien world, one where the old ways held no currency. His hidden personal crisis, a gnawing anxiety about his own perceived failures in the modern world, fueled his desperate desire to protect his grandmother, even if it meant tearing her away from everything she cherished. He couldn't shake the feeling that her stubborn adherence to tradition was a dangerous relic, a sentiment common in the towns, but utterly foreign to Anya's spirit. Adding to the monumental challenges was Konstantin Ivanov, the local wildlife official. He arrived at Spirit's Watch, bundled in official issue cold weather gear, his face grim. While the journal had undeniably piqued his professional curiosity, perhaps even stirred a faint memory of his own personal trauma related to wildlife, he remained steadfastly committed to protocol. "Ms. Petrova, I understand the sentiment truly," he began, his voice strained by the cold, "but this is highly irregular. Moving a herd of bisons into a restricted ecological zone requires extensive permits, environmental impact assessments, and a fully equipped team. We simply can't authorize this. There are modern, regulated solutions we can explore, like temporary fencing, or even a controlled relocation by air if necessary, once the weather breaks. Your methods, while historical, don't meet current safety and conservation standards." His words, though delivered with a semblance of politeness, felt like another layer of ice, a bureaucratic barrier as impenetrable as the snowdrifts themselves. He was trapped between his duty to the regulations and a burgeoning respect for Anya's unwavering resolve, a conflict that made him even more rigid in his stance. Anya, however, was not one to be deterred by bluster or red tape. She had planned meticulously, identifying a specific passage through the initial drifts that her ancestors had used. For this, a crucial piece of equipment was needed, a specialized part for her vintage but reliable snowmobile. It was the only machine capable of cutting a preliminary path through the deepest snow, a task that would otherwise be impossible for the small group of humans and the heavy-bodied bisons. She had stored the part, a custom-machined carburetor jet, in a small, locked compartment within her shed, a place she considered inviolable. As the day wore on and the biting wind began to pick up, she sent Elena to retrieve it, eager to begin the arduous work before nightfall. Elena, despite her initial skepticism, was beginning to feel the pull of Anya's resolve, a subtle shift in her teenage perspective. She hurried to the shed, her breath misting in the frigid air, the metallic clang of the lock echoing strangely in the vast silence. Her small hands fumbled with the latch to the compartment, but when it finally sprang open, her heart sank. The space was empty. The carburetor jet, a small yet indispensable piece of technology that represented a bridge between the ancient wisdom and the modern tools needed to execute it, was gone. Vanished. Elena stared at the vacant spot, a cold dread seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the 96-degree temperature. She rushed back to Anya, her face pale, the news tumbling out in a breathless rush. Anya listened, her ancient eyes narrowing, a deep frown furrowing her brow. It wasn't just missing, it had been taken. This was no accident, no misplacement in the chaos of a harsh winter. This was deliberate. A cold, hard realization settled over her. Someone had been to her shed, someone had known what to look for, and someone had wanted to stop her. The snow leopards were one thing, the unforgiving weather another, and Constantine's bureaucratic hurdles a frustrating third. But this was different. The sheer scale of the task ahead, stripped bare of any modern convenience, settled upon Anya and Elena with the weight of the frigid air itself. With the snowmobile's critical part missing, their options dwindled to one: manual labor, raw and unyielding, against the formidable Siberian winter. Anya, with a grim set to her jaw that belied her 90 years, retrieved 2 ancient, heavy wooden shovels and a pair of ice axes from the storage shed, their blades sharpened over decades. The air, a brutal 96 degrees Fahrenheit, bit at any exposed skin, demanding every ounce of their focus. "We clear a path," Anya declared, her voice raspy but firm, "one shovelful at a time, for the bisons." Elena, wrapped in layers of thick furs and wool, watched her great-grandmother, a knot of doubt tightening in her stomach. The snowdrifts around Spirit's Watch were monumental, some reaching 6 feet high, packed hard by weeks of relentless wind. To clear a significant path, even just a few hundred yards to a more sheltered grazing patch, felt like an impossible feat. Yet Anya didn't hesitate. She plunged an ice axe into a particularly stubborn drift, chipping away at the frozen crust with a strength that seemed to defy her age. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each swing a testament to decades of honed efficiency rather than youthful vigor. Elena, initially hesitant, picked up the second shovel. It felt heavy and awkward in her hands, her modern sensibilities screaming at the futility of it all. Back in Kolodnaya, a task like this would be handled by heavy machinery, not 2 women, one a nonagenarian, battling a landscape that seemed actively hostile. But as she watched Anya painstakingly carving out chunks of ice and snow, a different kind of resolve began to form within her. Anya's face, etched with wrinkles but alight with an inner fire, radiated a determination Elena had rarely witnessed. This wasn't just about clearing snow, it was about an act of pure will, a refusal to surrender. Elena mimicked Anya's rhythm, at first awkwardly, then with growing confidence. The physical exertion was immense, burning in her lungs and muscles, a stark contrast to her life in town. Her hands, despite thick mittens, ached from the cold and the repetitive strain. Anya, noticing Elena's struggles, offered quiet, precise instructions. "Lean into it, child. Let the earth help you. Breathe deep from your belly like the wind." Slowly, hour by grueling hour, a narrow trench began to form. Elena learned to gauge the density of the snow, how to use the shovel as a lever, how to conserve energy. She saw the wisdom in Anya's methods, passed down through generations, methods that had kept their people alive in this unforgiving land. The skepticism that had once clouded her mind began to melt away, replaced by a profound respect and a burgeoning sense of purpose. They worked through the fading daylight, the only sounds the scrape of metal on ice, the crunch of snow underfoot, and their own labored breaths. Anya pushed herself relentlessly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she never faltered. Elena, witnessing her great-grandmother's unwavering spirit despite the visible pain, found a wellspring of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She began to anticipate Anya's needs, clearing the heavier chunks, offering her a sip of warm tea from a thermos. Their bond, once strained by the chasm of generations and differing worldviews, deepened with every shared struggle, every exhausted glance of understanding. Elena wasn't just helping, she was learning, absorbing the ancient wisdom through her hands and aching muscles. As the first stars began to pierce the twilight, a distant rumble broke the silence, A snowmobile, its engine struggling against the cold, appeared on the horizon, its single headlight cutting a tentative beam through the gloom. It was Yuri. He dismounted, looking like a man who had not slept in days. His face pale and drawn beneath his heavy hood, he carried a small, battered duffel bag. "Babushka," he began, his voice hoarse. "Elena, what are you doing out here? It's too cold, too dangerous." He gestured vaguely at the meager path they had cleared, an expression of exasperation and fear warring on his face. Anya straightened up, wiping a gloved hand across her brow. "We are protecting what is ours, Yuri. What else would we be doing?" Her tone was firm, but Elena noticed a flicker of concern in her eyes as she took in her grandson's disheveled appearance. Yuri walked closer, his gaze avoiding Anya's direct stare. He looked at the vast frozen expanse, the bisons huddled in the distance, and then back at the small, determined figures of his grandmother and daughter. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. I came to tell you something important, something I should have told you before." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning his lungs. "It's not just about your safety, Babushka. It's about everything." He paused, searching for the right words, his shoulders slumping under an invisible burden. "My business, back in Kolodnaya, it's gone. Completely. The investment, the loan from the bank, it all collapsed. A bad venture, a gamble that didn't pay off." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound despair. "I owe a lot of money, Babushka. More than I can ever make back. My family, Elena's future, it's all at risk. We're facing total ruin, financial destitution. We could lose our home, everything." Elena gasped, her eyes wide with shock. This was the hidden crisis, the unspoken burden that had been weighing on her father. She had noticed his increasing stress, his late nights, but had never imagined the true depth of his predicament. Yuri finally met Anya's gaze, his eyes pleading. "Selling Spirit's Watch, it's the only way, Babushka. The land, the cabin, it's worth a lot. Enough to pay off my debts, to save us, to give Elena a future. I tried to convince you to leave, to come to Kolodnaya, not just because I feared for you, but because I needed you to understand the value of this place, not just as heritage, but as a lifeline for us." His voice cracked with raw emotion, the confession tearing through the frosty air. "Please, Babushka, you don't understand what it means. It's my last chance. Our last chance." Anya stood motionless, the weight of his words settling upon her like a fresh layer of snow. Anya remained a statue, the bitter revelation of Yuri's hidden crisis chilling her more profoundly than the Siberian air. The silence that followed his confession stretched, taut as a bowstring, before it was finally broken by Elena. Her great-granddaughter, whose initial skepticism had slowly eroded, now looked at her father with a newfound understanding, a raw empathy shining in her eyes that Anya had rarely seen. Elena stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Yuri's arm, a silent gesture of comfort that surprised them both. "Dad," she began, her voice soft but firm, "Grandma Anya isn't doing this to be difficult. She's not just protecting bisons. She's protecting us, our history, everything that makes us, well, us." Her gaze then shifted to Anya, a plea in her eyes. "And Grandma, Dad's just scared. He really is. He thinks he's doing what's best, even if he's going about it all wrong." Eleanor's words, a bridge between two seemingly unyielding cliffs, hung in the frigid air of the cabin. Yuri, still reeling from his own admission, looked from his daughter to his grandmother, the usual frustration warring with a dawning comprehension. He had always seen Anya's resistance as stubbornness, a refusal to adapt to the modern world. But Eleanor's framing made him pause. Could it be that his grandmother wasn't just clinging to the past, but actively safeguarding something vital for their future? The thought was unsettling, challenging his entire worldview. He ran a gloved hand through his hair, the gesture one of profound weariness rather than anger. I don't want to lose you, Grandma," he mumbled, the raw emotion in his voice a stark contrast to his usual stoicism. "It's too dangerous out here. What if something happens?" Anya, finally stirring, met Elena's gaze, a flicker of appreciation passing between them. The young woman had seen beyond the surface, understood the deeper currents at play. "My dear Elena," Anya said, her voice raspy but clear, "your father's heart is good, even if his vision sometimes clouds. He sees only the peril, not the heritage." She then turned her attention to Yuri, her eyes, ancient and wise, piercing through his defenses. "And you, my grandson, do you think I have lived 90 years in this land by being foolish, by ignoring danger? My methods are not outdated, Yuri. They are time-tested. They are ours." A beat of silence, and then Anya continued, her tone softening slightly. "But you are right about one thing. It is dangerous, and I am old. Perhaps a strong back and a keen eye could be useful, even if you do not fully believe." Yuri, caught between his ingrained fear for Anya's safety and Elena's eloquent plea, found himself in a difficult position. He still believed her plan to defend the bison herd was a fool's errand, a desperate gamble against impossible odds. His modern sensibilities screamed for logic, for practicality, for moving to Kolodnaya, where there was central heating and medical aid. Yet the look in Anya's eyes, the unwavering resolve, stirred something ancestral within him he hadn't known existed. He sighed, a cloud of vapor escaping his lips. "Okay, Grandma. Okay," he conceded, the words grudging, heavy with reluctance. "But I'm not doing this because I think it's a good idea. I'm doing it to keep an eye on you, to make sure you don't get yourself hurt trying to play, whatever it is you're playing." His agreement was a thin veneer over his anxiety, but it was an agreement nonetheless, a crack in the wall of his resistance. This was the first fragile step in Yuri's journey toward understanding, a tentative embrace of a path he had long rejected. He began by helping with the more physically demanding aspects of Anya's defense strategies, tasks like reinforcing fences with thicker branches and ice, or hauling heavy bundles of fragrant herbs for the smoke deterrence. He grumbled, he complained about the cold, about the futility of it all, but he worked. Elena watched him, a quiet triumph blooming in her chest. She saw him not just as her father, but as a bridge between two worlds, slowly, painfully, starting to mend. She would often walk alongside him, sharing stories Anya had told her, explaining the deeper meaning behind each ritual, each traditional method. She spoke of the spiritual significance of the bisons, of their role in the Saka cosmology, how they were not just animals, but living embodiments of their ancestors' resilience. Yuri listened, sometimes with a skeptical frown, other times with a flicker of curiosity, the seeds of understanding beginning to sprout in the frozen ground of his skepticism. Meanwhile, Konstantin Ivanov, the pragmatic wildlife official, observed Anya's efforts with a growing, albeit grudging, respect. He had initially viewed her as an eccentric, an old woman stubbornly clinging to outdated customs in the face of modern ecological challenges. His official reports were filled with boilerplate recommendations for relocation and managed culling, all standard protocol for dealing with escalating predator populations, but what he saw unfolding at Spirit's Watch defied his textbooks. The sheer tenacity of Anya Petrova, a woman old enough to be his grandmother, facing down an unprecedented number of snow leopards, was something he couldn't easily dismiss. He had witnessed the effectiveness of some of her traditional deterrents, the strategically placed animal bones, the bundles of pungent herbs burned in small controlled fires, the rhythmic drumming that seemed to carry on the wind, all designed to disorient and deter the apex predators without harming them. He'd seen a particularly brazen leopard, emboldened by hunger, approach the bison enclosure only to recoil, seemingly spooked by a combination of a low, resonating hum emanating from a carefully constructed ice drum and the swirling smoke of a burning herb bundle. Constantine found himself making excuses to stay longer at Spirit's Watch, ostensibly for monitoring purposes. He would quietly question Anya about the specific properties of the herbs she used, the ancestral knowledge behind the placement of certain markers, the subtle nuances of reading the snow's language for predator movements. She would answer, her explanations steeped in generations of observation and spiritual connection, often speaking of the land as a living entity, a concept far removed from his scientific training. Yet he couldn't deny the results. The bison herd, though stressed, was holding its own, a remarkable feat against such overwhelming odds. An unforgiving tempest descended upon Spirit's Watch, a swirling vortex of white that swallowed the already stark landscape whole. Snow, driven by winds that howled like 1,000 hungry wolves, obliterated visibility, reducing the world to a blinding, frigid canvas where the horizon vanished and the ground merged seamlessly with the sky. The temperature, already a soul-numbing 75 degrees, felt even more oppressive. The air thick with ice crystals that stung exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. It was an unprecedented blizzard, even for this remote corner of the Sakha Republic, a brutal antagonist that sought to isolate Anya, Yuri, and Elena completely, cutting them off from the faintest glimmer of the outside world, from any hope of aid. The blizzard became a living entity, its ceaseless roar a constant companion to their terror. It pressed against the sturdy log walls of Anya's ancestral homestead, making the timbers groan as if in protest, and piled drifts against the bison enclosure that threatened to breach its protective barrier. Under this chaotic, blinding cover, the snow leopards, driven to a fever pitch of desperation by the relentless cold and the dwindling wild prey, launched their most coordinated and ferocious assault yet. They moved like phantoms in the whiteout, their pale coats blending perfectly with the swirling snow, their numbers seemingly magnified by the disorienting chaos. This wasn't merely a probing attack. It was a full-scale siege on the main bison enclosure, a desperate gamble for survival by the apex predators. Anya, her face a mask of grim determination beneath the frost-rimmed hood of her traditional parka, moved with a surprising agility for her 90 years. She was a beacon of ancestral wisdom, her every movement purposeful, guided by generations of knowledge passed down through the harsh winters. She directed Yuri and Elena with sharp, concise commands, her voice cutting through the wind's shriek. "The southern flank, they're trying to breach the old fence line," she yelled, pointing with a gnarled hand towards a section weakened by a recent drift. Yuri, despite his earlier frustrations with Anya's traditional ways, now moved with an instinct born of necessity and a deep-seated desire to protect his family. He wielded a long, heavy staff, its tip reinforced with steel, using it to clear snow and occasionally to ward off an emboldened leopard that dared to approach too closely. Elena, initially overwhelmed, found her footing, her youthful energy a vital asset. She helped Anya with the ancient fire techniques, meticulously placing dried moss and birch bark in small, strategically located fire pits around the enclosure, carefully shielded from the wind. The smoke, thick and pungent, mingled with the swirling snow, creating an acrid barrier that confused and deterred the leopards, their sensitive noses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar scents. It was a harrowing, desperate battle, a primal clash between man, beast, and the unforgiving elements. The blizzard clawed at them, freezing their eyelashes, numbing their fingers and toes, threatening to turn their very breath into shards of ice. Yet they fought on, a testament to their unwavering spirit and the deep bond they shared with the land and its creatures. Yuri, a man of the modern town, found himself relying on skills he barely remembered from childhood visits. His limited modern tools, a sturdy shovel, a powerful flashlight that cut weakly through the whiteout, proving far less effective than Anya's profound understanding of the environment and the animals. He had brought some heavy-duty rope and a few spare metal stakes, which he now used to shore up a section of the fence that threatened to collapse under the pressure of the snow and the leopard's persistent attempts to scale it. He worked with a frantic energy, his breath pluming in the frigid air, the image of his daughter's safety and Anya's unwavering resolve fueling his every strained muscle. Elena, her initial fear slowly giving way to a fierce protectiveness, learned quickly. Anya taught her how to recognize the subtle shifts in the wind that indicated a new approach by the predators, how to scatter dried animal dung mixed with specific herbs to create a more potent deterrent smoke, and how to make a high-pitched call that mimicked the warning cry of a larger predator, momentarily startling the snow leopards into retreat. She was a bridge between the generations, absorbing Anya's wisdom with a newfound respect, her earlier skepticism melting away in the face of such raw, unyielding resilience. The bisons, huddled together in a massive living wall of muscle and fur, bellowed their defiance, their hot breath rising in steamy clouds, their powerful horns occasionally lowered in a show of defense whenever a leopard dared to get too close. The sheer number of predators was overwhelming. There were dozens, perhaps scores, their glowing eyes piercing the whiteout like malevolent stars, their desperate hunger driving them to unprecedented boldness. During a brief lull, as a particularly strong gust of wind momentarily cleared a small patch of snow near the perimeter of the enclosure, Anya's sharp eyes caught a subtle, incongruous detail. Tangled in a low-hanging branch just beyond the reach of the fence was a glint of metal. She stooped, her old bones protesting, and carefully disentangled it. It was a thin, almost invisible strand of braided steel wire, far too intricate and specific to be a natural element of the wilderness or a simple snare left by a lone trapper. This wasn't the crude, homemade wire typically found in the traps of local hunters seeking small game. This was a sophisticated, commercially manufactured snare wire, the kind designed for larger, more valuable pelts, almost surgically precise in its construction. Her gaze hardened. This was the first concrete clue, undeniable evidence, pointing towards human interference. The snow leopards were desperate, yes, but this wire spoke of a different kind of predation, one driven not by hunger but by greed. Anya held the wire up, her eyes meeting Yuri's. "Not just the cats," she rasped, her voice gravelly from the cold and exertion. "There are others, shadow hunters." Ooh, the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, a chilling realization that their battle was not just against nature's fury and the wild's hunger, but against the calculated cruelty of man. Yuri felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a different kind of fear than the one he felt for the leopards. He knew of the shadow hunters, the desperate group of local poachers who occasionally ventured into these remote lands. They were opportunists, and the unprecedented surge of snow leopards, combined with the extreme cold, would present a tempting, though unethical, opportunity for them to harvest valuable pelts. Elena, seeing the wire, understood the gravity of the discovery. Her young face etched with a mix of anger and dismay. The thought of humans exploiting the suffering of both the bisons and the leopards for profit was a bitter pill to swallow. The revelation galvanized them further. The blizzard continued its relentless assault, but their focus sharpened. The perimeter defenses were reinforced, not just against the leopards, but now with an awareness of potential human sabotage. Anya, with her deep knowledge of the land, began to look for other subtle signs, tracks that might be hidden by the falling snow, disturbances that were not natural. Yuri, using his limited satellite phone, managed to get a brief, crackling signal through during a momentary lull in the storm, sending a garbled message to Konstantin Ivanov, the pragmatic wildlife official in Kolodnaya. He didn't have all the details, but he conveyed the urgency. Blizzard, leopards, poachers, spirits watch. He knew Konstantin, despite his adherence to regulations, had a deep respect for wildlife and a personal trauma that made him particularly sensitive to poaching. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of defense, vigilance, and survival. The snowstorm raged for what felt like an eternity, but slowly, gradually, it began to abate. As the winds lessened and the snow tapered off, the true extent of the devastation became apparent. Drifts towered over the homestead, burying fences and structures, transforming the landscape into an alien world of sculpted white. But amidst the desolation, the bison herd remained. Battered but alive, a testament to the combined efforts of Anya, Yuri, and Elena. The leopards, their initial coordinated assault thwarted, had retreated, their desperation momentarily quelled by the sheer resilience of the human-bison alliance and the overwhelming power of the storm. With the immediate threat from the leopards somewhat diminished, the focus shifted to the shadow hunters. Anya, following barely discernible signs in the freshly fallen snow, led Yuri and Elena on a cautious patrol. They found more evidence: crude campsites partially buried by snow, discarded energy bar wrappers, and additional lengths of the distinct snare wire. The trail led them towards the Whispering Ice River, a treacherous, frozen artery that served as both a natural barrier and a potential escape route for those seeking to evade detection. It was there, huddled in a makeshift shelter carved into a snowdrift on the far bank, that they found the shadow hunters, a small group of 3 men, gaunt and shivering, their faces etched with a mix of fear and desperation, their meager supplies dwindling. They had been as trapped by the blizzard as everyone else, their ill-gotten gains, a few snow leopard pelts, now a heavy burden rather than a prize. The confrontation was tense, but without violence. Anya, standing tall despite her age, her eyes piercing, spoke to them in a low, resonant voice, not of accusation, but of the sacred balance of the land. She reminded them of the ancient ways, of the respect due to all creatures, and of the consequences of disturbing the delicate harmony of nature. Yuri, his initial anger tempered by a sense of duty, explained the severity of their actions, not only against the wildlife, but against the community. Elena, seeing the men's hollow eyes, felt a pang of pity, understanding that their desperation, like the leopards, was born of harsh circumstances, though their choices were far more reprehensible. Just then, a snowmobile, its engine a faint drone in the still, cold air, appeared on the horizon. It was Konstantin Ivanov, accompanied by 2 rangers, having braved the tail end of the blizzard after receiving Yuri's fragmented message. Konstantin, seeing the scene unfold, the poachers caught red-handed. The resilient Anya, Yuri, and Elena, standing guard, felt a profound shift within him. The trauma of his past, the loss of a treasured wildlife project due to poaching, resonated deeply. He approached the shadow hunters, his voice firm, but not without a hint of understanding for their desperate plight. He explained the legal ramifications, the fines, and the potential jail time, but he also offered a path to rehabilitation, a chance to work with the Wildlife Department on conservation efforts to earn an honest living. The poachers, exhausted, defeated, and facing the grim reality of their situation, offered little resistance. They were taken into custody, their illegal pelts confiscated, their poaching days at an end, at least for now. With the shadow hunters dealt with and the blizzard finally receding, a fragile peace settled over Spirit's Watch. The bisons, though still wary, began to graze more calmly. The remaining snow leopards, having learned a harsh lesson, retreated deeper into the ancestral Echoes Valley, their numbers thinned but their spirit unbroken, awaiting the return of their natural prey, understanding that the human territory was not to be easily breached. Constantine, deeply impressed by Anya's wisdom and the family's resilience, made arrangements for additional feed for the bison herd and promised increased patrols to deter future poaching. He also offered Yuri a position working with his department, leveraging his modern skills for conservation, a bridge between the old ways and the new. Anya watched the departing snowmobiles, a faint smile gracing her lips. The battle was won, but the war for balance was eternal. She looked at Yuri, who now saw the wisdom in her traditions, and at Elena, whose eyes sparkled with a newfound understanding and respect for her heritage. Spirit's Watch, her ancestral homestead, had faced its greatest challenge and emerged stronger. Yuri, his personal crisis of identity resolved, now embraced his role as a guardian of his family's legacy, no longer seeking to pull Anya away from her home, but instead committing to help her preserve it.